All right, Hardy and Weinberg, sort of the purpose of their mathematical equation was to show that no evolution is occurring if certain circumstances hold true, and mathematically the frequencies should stay the same generation after generation. But if within a particular population the gene frequencies are changing, it's an indication that evolution is occurring. Why is evolution occurring? One of five things must be happening. They're kind of the opposite of the requirements that Hardy Weinberg said have to be occurring so that evolution doesn't happen, but not exactly. Okay, if evolution is happening, there's probably one of five things occurring. The first one, mutations. There's new mutations. They said originally there can't be new mutations. Well, now there's new mutations, flaws in replication leading to new genes that are causing the gene frequencies to change. This is a photograph of a paw that has an extra toe. That's an example of a very common mutation. We're looking at new mutations in this circumstance. Number two, evolution could be occurring due to migration, the movement of new individuals bringing their new genes into a population. Obviously, animals can move to new areas, but don't forget pollen can also. Some pollen can get caught up in the jet stream and travel halfway around the world. All right, number three is a little bit more complicated. Number three is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is the random loss of gene variations, not due to the preference of certain genes over others. It's a random loss, and there's two major causes. The first one we refer to as the bottleneck effect. That's when some individuals die accidentally, not because they're weaker. They just die accidentally before reproducing. Perhaps due to something like a flood from a tsunami. It wipes out a huge number of the population. If you look at the diagram below, there are blue marbles, white marbles, and yellow marbles. But after this event that wipes out so many of them and only a few of them survive, suddenly the yellow marbles aren't there anymore. It's not that the yellow marbles weren't just as good as the others, they just accidentally were removed from the population. And what that leads to is a lack of genetic variation. It turns out scientists think that cheetahs, there's a few other animals, but cheetahs may have experienced some kind of a bottleneck effect during their evolution. Cheetahs are very genetically uniform. They appear to have gone through a lot of inbreeding, and that means that cheetahs are possibly less able to respond to changes in the environment. Some scientists would say that cheetahs are slated for extinction because they don't have enough genetic diversity to be able to respond to stresses that will undoubtedly hit the cheetahs as the future moves forward. The second form of genetic drift, remember genetic drift is the random loss of genetic diversity, is due to something called the founder effect. Now this is when a population starts on purpose, but it starts with only a few individuals, and whatever their genes that they bring with them, whether they're good genes or bad genes, because they're founding that population, all the members of that population that are descendants are going to possess that DNA. And that means that there's not necessarily a lot of genetic diversity. We see that in several communities in the humans. In the old Amish, there are many, old order Amish, there are many genetic disorders that are persisting within their community simply because their community doesn't marry outside of their own community. And so whatever genetic disorders they brought into it, it persists. And the one example that we have here, and there's many examples, is microcephaly, being born with a smaller brain and skull size, leads to mental retardation. And it's been unusually common, not common, just more common than in the general population among the old order Amish of Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. Another example is extremely high rates of Huntington's disease, which is a fairly rare disease in other populations, but in areas of Venezuela, particularly people who can trace their ancestry to one woman, Maria Concepcion Soto, they all are able to trace their ancestry to her, and they have Huntington's disease. The third one is a fascinating one about Native Americans. There's huge rates of type O blood in South and Central American Indians. They believe that as humans crossed the Bering Strait into Alaska and then moved south, most of the humans that moved or migrated or were nomadic stopped once they hit North America. But just a few families, probably related individuals, kept traveling through Mexico and then into South America. And those related individuals were then the founding fathers, so to speak, of all the native populations in South America. And because they were type O, their descendants are also type O. Okay, the fourth reason that you might see a population, or we might discover that a population is evolving, has to do with non-random mating. Hardy and Weinberg said the mating has to be random based on that particular trait. So in class we sometimes say, do you pick your mate depending on whether they have attached earlobes or unattached earlobes, and obviously not. So with regards to our earlobes, mating is random. But there are some traits within humans or within animal populations where the trait is relevant to how an individual mates. So certain genotypes mate more often than expected if mating is random. So one example here, we have these snow geese, and it turns out that snow geese come in two colors, blue and white, and that they tend to prefer mating with individuals of their same color. They are the same species at this time. But as that continues, as the blues continue to mate with the blues and the whites continue to the whites, you're going to find find inflated rates of homozygous genotypes, and it's very possible that eventually these two different colors of snow geese won't even be able to mate with each other anymore, and we'll end up defining them as two separate species. But currently, they are the same species. Okay, the fifth and final reason that evolution might be occurring within a population is in fact the idea of natural selection, that there are certain genotypes that are preferable and that are leaving behind more offspring. We refer to those advantageous traits as adaptations, which is a somewhat misleading word because they're not adapting to their environment. They were actually born with that genetic trait, but it gave them an advantage in the environment that they're in, and so they are able to leave behind more offspring. Okay, just to review what we had asked earlier in our previous PowerPoint, what advantage does it give a species to have variation in genes? Why not just have the best gene for all offspring? Why have albino squirrels? Why haven't albino squirrels vanished? Why isn't natural selection chosen against them? We believe it's because this gives a species a way to change or adapt if necessary. If there is what's called a selective pressure, if the environment changes, if there's a new disease, if there's a new predator, if there's a new food source or an old food source goes away, there have to be some individuals already present in order to change, in order for the species to change as a whole. I'll read this quote: "Evolutionary spurts occur when a population is stressed by a change in the environment, migration to a new place, or a drastic change in the genome," which is the DNA. When challenged with a new set of problems, a population either adjusts through natural selection or it becomes extinct. The fossil record indicates that extinction is the more common outcome. Those populations that do survive crises often change enough to become a new species. All right, that's it.